Good morning, and thank you for joining us for this Google Plus Hangout on energy independence. Today's conversation is part of our 2-week series on just this topic of energy independence in the country, looking at the country's energy picture. Last Sunday, in last Sunday's Oklahoman, we had a series of articles looking at defining what is energy independence. This is a term that presidents, politicians, and industry leaders have been using for 40 years. But really trying to dig into what that really means. We have with us today Phil Crofts is Marketing Director at Dillon Transport. He's based in the Chicago area. It's a trucking company that is in the process of converting your fleet to running on natural gas. We also have Steve Agee, Dean of the Minders School of Business at Oklahoma City University. And we have Troy Jones, a financial advisor for Access Financial Resources in Oklahoma City. Also on the line are energy writers Jay Marks, who is joining us from the newsroom, and Paul Monies, who is joining us from his house. And I'm Adam Wilmoth, energy editor here in studio at News OK. Let's go ahead and dig into our conversation. Dean Agee, let's start with you. Let's look at, we've talked about this effort of energy independence. I was hoping that you would just tell us a little bit about what you think that means, and whether it's something that the country should move towards.
Well, sure, Adam. It's a pleasure to be with you and the other guests. I'd love to visit about this. Of course, my background's in energy. Energy independence. Well, it means different things, I'm sure, to different individuals. To me, it means having some sense of security for the United States. I don't think it means necessarily we need to reduce our imports of energy products like oil to zero. You know, we want to maintain some reasonable balance of international trade with respect to energy issues. To me, energy independence means we need to try to reduce our reliance on hostile foreign governments that we have historically been dependent upon in terms of oil imports. So to the extent we can do that, I think we need to move toward energy independence. There's lots of benefits, of course, for the United States in terms of gearing up their energy production and energy resources. It increases domestic economic activity, which is good for our domestic economy. It alleviates some national security concerns that have been expressed by a lot of individuals. It reduces our outflow of U.S. dollars abroad, so it helps in terms of our trade deficit. There's a lot of benefits to moving toward energy independence for the United States.
And can you tell us a little bit about what you see for the consumer? How would that, specifically for the consumer, how the consumer would benefit from having that?
Well, presumably, as we move toward energy independence, and when I talk about energy, I think of energy as a system. So we're looking at not only oil, but we're looking at natural gas, and I know one of our guests is going to talk about liquefied natural gas, or LNG. We look at wind, we look at solar, we look at nuclear. We look at energy as a system. And one of the other components we need to make sure we think about is energy efficiency, because efficiency is critical in terms of moving toward energy independence. For the consumer, of course, we're looking at ways in which we can reduce prices. So to the extent that we can produce more oil domestically and keep crude oil prices lower, then that necessarily means we're going to be reducing gasoline prices, diesel prices, home heating oil prices, and other types of refined byproduct prices. So I think the consumer would benefit from having increased production here at home.
I think we've discovered during this that when we talk about energy independence, we're mostly talking about transportation in the U.S. Phil, that seems to be your area of expertise. How do you see that unfolding in the years to come?
Well, we're obviously in the very initial stages of this country understanding natural gas transportation. There's a lot of good things that go into this, and it's we feel it's the right thing to do. And there's certainly savings for our transportation industry, for our company in particular. But there's also savings for the country, and the fact we don't have to fund both sides of the war. if we can create the fuel here, and natural gas can really replace thousands and thousands of gallons of diesel. I mean, we have 14 trucks in Dallas, and we run those trucks about 300,000 miles a year. So let's say in round numbers, they're double shifted. So there's one guy drives a truck for 500 miles, the next guy gets in and drives a truck for 500 miles. So that truck never shuts off really, except the fuel. So that's 50,000 gallons per truck of diesel fuel that's displaced by natural gas. That's domestic, creating American jobs. And, the fact that we save $1 a gallon in round numbers is $50,000 a year times 14 trucks. It's a considerable savings for us. And, we've got that model that we've used in Texas for 13 trucks actually in one sleeper. And then we've got 10 trucks in the Akron, Ohio area that are operating on a similar model. So,
how much of your fleet does that represent?
Okay, looks like we may have lost our feed there for a minute.
But Troy, you and I talked a little bit about alternative fuel vehicles on the consumer end. Obviously, it's a better option for fleets. They have a little different dynamic. What are your thoughts on the consumer vehicle choices out there right now?
So, Jay, to kind of segue from Mr. Croft's comments, a lot of people we work with are business owners, and so what we found is that it's a very specific analysis from user to user. So one business might make sense out of it. In fact, I think probably what Mr. Croft was getting to was telling us what percentages of his fleet it worked for and which it didn't. Some of those trucks it's going to work for, some it's not. That would be the same thing on the consumer vehicle. What we're noticing is that the reason to invest in an electric car or a hybrid, and I just at the fair over the last day of the fair, looking at the Nissan Leaf, and it was a $40,000 vehicle with a 73-mile range. And so we were just talking with the people we were with, and 73-mile range in Oklahoma City is with a 7-hour charge rate doesn't work for a lot of people. And so what we're finding is that if you have surplus money, capital, and you want to spend it for what you believe to be the right thing to do, that's one thing. But we're not seeing the economics pay out yet for most people on electric cars and hybrids, especially in the Oklahoma City area.
What did you think about the CNG options that are available right now?
CNG options, I'll tell you what I tried to do. I tried to say, hey, how can we get this done to where I can buy a car and I can fill it up at home out of my ONG pipe? And I thought, wow, what an awesome way to do that. There's one supplier in the world for a home filling station that's 50-something% owned by Honda. And Honda's the only car out there that has a off the assembly line natural gas vehicle. So I looked at that at the state fair over the weekend. You can put if you were a bowler, I don't think you could put a bowling ball in the trunk. But other than that, I haven't really done the further analysis on that other than to find that it's really expensive to buy a $5,000 home filling station and then everything else going with it. Not the least of which is if natural gas prices stay down this low for a really long time, that's a problem in and of itself, which it brings up a whole nother issue for natural gas conversion.
I'm back, by the way.
Well, thank you, Mr. Crofts. Thanks for. I'm glad to have you back in our discussion. Glad to have you back in our conversation. I think you cut out when you were talking about your fleet, and you're talking about how many vehicles you have converted and what that represents in your fleet.
We have 24 converted. And our fleet's about 380 trucks. Now, we do have plans for 50 more trucks for the first quarter of next year that will be CNG. So that would put our fleet at 75 out of probably 400. So what is that, a third? I don't know. At any rate, yeah, but so, this time next year we will be probably a third of our fleet will be natural gas, and we like the model so much that we will continue to move in that direction unless something dramatically changes.
Right. Well, tell me. So you say you're going to be using both CNG and LNG. Is that correct?
Correct. Correct.
Can you tell me a little bit of why you decided to use both, and what are some of the differences that you've seen?
Well, LNG, the application for LNG, you get more range on your vehicle without having to have so much weight and extra storage of compressed natural gas, because there's, I don't know if it's 4 or 5 times the BTUs you get when you freeze a natural gas, or you get it very cold. It's like 5 or 6 times the BTUs, and you gas guys would know, than the compressed is. So if you've got a longer range, if you want to go 600 miles, you can do it with a twin tank LNG and not be that much heavier than a regular diesel truck. If you tried to do that with CNG, you'd have to have so many tanks out there that the weight, and you'd reduce your cargo, obviously. And for a carrier like ourselves that get paid by the ton, if I've got to carry an extra ton of fuel storage in place of cargo, that costs me. If we can carry 26 tons, it's 5% of my load.
Now, Phil, can you kind of go back and tell me what the evolution of switching to LNG and natural gas was? I mean, I understand it came from your customers a little bit from their side of things.
Well, we're fortunate in that in our business we work with some world-class, best-in-class customers. This customer happens to be Owens Corning, is the first guy that we really had struck the relationship with. And when Boone Pickens came out with his plan of the Pickens plan, where at that time it was wind, it was solar, it was anything to go along. Now it's pretty much just digressed to natural gas plan. But Mike Thaman, the chairman of Owens Corning, was the first corporate sponsor to the Pickens plan. Owens Corning is one of our primary customers, and so we thought, well, hey, it's a natural fit for us to go with natural gas to be cleaner, greener, and oh, by the way, there's going to be some savings in there for them also. So that's really where it started. And as soon as they've got high-powered executives there that are just sustainability officers, and most of the world-class companies that have a sizable carbon footprint, as the asphalt shingle business or the fiberglass business does in Owens' case, if they can save tens of thousands of tons a year through the transport of their product, they're going to put that in their public relations as far as their green and how much they can save and those kinds of things. But sustainability is a major factor with these guys. We're also working with a company in Florida. I'm not going to release a name. That's going to be with the 50 CNG trucks, and they are a major national footprint company. So yeah, I mean, it gets the trucking business out of a rate war or a rat race to the bottom on who can run the cheapest goods. At that point, you start to cheat on your insurance, you start to cheat on your vehicles, you start to cheat on the quality of your drivers. I've got to get cheaper. The trucks are less safe. The benefits for the drivers go down. You attract poor drivers, and it's a cycle down to the bottom of who can be the cheapest. When you get a handle like natural gas, then you can say, wait a second, we can be the same price as these cheap guys, but we're doing it right. Our drivers all have, uniforms, 401ks, Blue Cross Blue Shield, et cetera, et cetera. Our oldest truck is we're selling our 09s now. So we got a few 07, but we've got an up-to-date fleet, and it's just been very good. So that's how it started, really, from a marriage between a fuel supplier, a corporate customer that says, I'll give you the lanes if you do the gas. And then the supplier of the gas says, we'll give you the gas if you'll use so many gallons. And so that's how it's a triangular type proposition that starts.
Now, where do you see this in maybe 5 years? I mean, I know that several companies are working on infrastructure throughout the country along interstates. What's your best guess on where we'll be in 5 years?
That's a little above my pay grade. But I think with Clean rolling out this natural gas highway, I think it could be very good. But there's an investment the carrier has to make. There's a risk. A lot of the major big carriers, the Hunts and the Werners and Schneiders and those guys, it's not broke for them. I mean, they have all their lanes. They're servicing Walmart, they're servicing Lowe's, they're servicing all these major players. Why am I going to rock the boat with natural gas when diesel works fine for me?
Okay.
So, when those guys start to move, it might make a difference.
That's great. Well, once again, you're watching our Google Plus Hangout on News OK, and our topic is energy independence. And feel free to join us at newsok.com. We have a chat going, and we have received a couple of questions. This first one, maybe most relevant, I'm not sure who would be best to answer it. Maybe Dean Agee, maybe this would be best for you. As we have a question about ethanol. And the question is, how do you see growing resistance or criticism to ethanol playing into this effort to establish energy independence?
Well, there's been a lot of debate about ethanol, and with the advent of compressed natural gas and LNG, I think over time, personally, I see the CNG and LNG displacing ethanol. Ethanol, of course, it either comes from corn or sugar cane or some type of food product, and so there's a lot of arguments against using corn, let's say, as a base for ethanol production. So I think in the long run, you're going to see a dwindling supply and demand for ethanol because we have these other resources that are more readily available at a lower cost. I would like to follow up on some of the things Phil says, because as an economist, I'm just intrigued by, what is happening on the ground when the rubber meets the road. And he's given us some great data so far. I wanted to mention today, or tomorrow actually, here in Oklahoma City, Phil, you'll be interested in this. Our governor, Fallon, is having an energy conference, and we're actually the lead sponsor of that energy conference. And Governor Hickenlooper from Colorado is coming in for this. Last year, they signed a memorandum of understanding where they're going to try to develop a relationship with automobile manufacturers and dealers to supply more CNG-fired vehicles, and this is like consumer-type vehicles, not just fleet trucks, to the marketplace by having the states who adopt this plan purchase CNG vehicles from these manufacturers. And tomorrow at 11 a.m., they're going to make an announcement about a bid proposal that they let out as to who's going to manufacture and who's going to distribute these new CNG vehicles to the states. 22 states have signed on to this agreement now. So it's a big deal. This is coming down the road. You asked the question, Paul, about 5 years from now. I think in the next 5 to 10 years, we're going to see that infrastructure built out by people like Love's Country Stores, who are now in over 40 states around the country. They're installing compressed natural gas fueling stations around the country. That's going to continue to happen. As that does occur, we're going to have the ability to supply both trucks and fleets and personal passenger cars with more CNG or LNG as demanded. So I'm really excited about the options we have available. Jay mentioned earlier, or Paul did, that oil and gasoline are the primary transportation fuels in the United States right now. Over time, that's going to start being eaten away by LNG and CNG.
We also have a question about nuclear energy and other energy sources. I know a lot of our discussion here has been on transportation fuels. If you're talking about energy independence, the country already is mostly or almost completely independent on power generation. But I think that's still an interesting topic that people are interested in. Can you weigh in on whether you expect nuclear power to be a factor going forward?
All of the reports that I've seen, and this comes from the Energy Information Administration, it comes from the natural gas study that MIT's conducted, indicates that long term, and the Chinese are remarkable at looking at the next 100 years, not the next 5 or 10 or 20 years, but long term, we need to look and see what our energy resources are going to be. And the reports that I've seen indicate that nuclear is going to play a pretty major role in that. So the next 50 to 80 years, We're probably going to see more nuclear plants built, more nuclear power generated, and this is, of course, on the electric power generation side. It's got really nothing to do with transportation fuels. But on the power generation side, we're going to see a dwindling amount of coal being used because of the environmental concerns over coal. We're going to see a ramp up in natural gas consumption for electric power generation, for wind power generation, and I think in the long run, we're going to see more nuclear power generation in the United States.
So, Adam, Troy Jones here, if I can chime in on that, if that's okay.
Please.
Just a couple of things. I think maybe anecdotes or whatever, but one of the things is that if it's my understanding, Energy Information Administration and others that suggests that it's just interesting that if we had every country go to using nuclear and saying, okay, that's the answer, that we would then have the next shortage, and that'd be a shortage of uranium, plutonium, whatever we're going to use to fuel those reactors. We'd be having a shortage of that too. So this global rush toward that solution, and I think that's at least partially instructive for the individual consumer, that there isn't one answer to what's going to be going down the road. But with 95% or 97% of our current transportation fuels being oil and basically petroleum products, it seems to me like if an individual wants to diversify or reduce their volatility for their energy consumption prices going forward, they might be taking some of their own actions in that way, because all we're going to do as a world is drive ourselves to the next bubble in pricing somewhere or shortage.
So to that point, is it a good idea to use a mix, to not be using just one source, but to use several different sources?
Well, some of the things, there's a book out called Abundance by Peter Diamond's and another author, I can't recall his name right offhand. But what's interesting about that book, the concept of or one of the premises of that book is that it democratizes that we're democratizing the opportunities in the world because of internet technology and just what we're doing right here. This is a perfect example of that. So what would happen is that some of the devices that are available for the individual consumer, just about everybody will tell you the first thing you do in energy independence from a consumer standpoint is use less. So to the extent that you can take advantage of smart hours at OG&E and become aware, so you've got this little light bulb that pops on your thermometer, your thermostat at home saying, warning, warning, warning. It raises a person's consciousness about that. And I notice people turning off lights and doing things differently. So it's a behavioral change. So it's not just all external in that way. So you got solar panels that are starting to make more sense, which is an individual's opportunity to build their own power plant. And it works best whenever the costs are the highest. And the costs are the highest in the summertime between 2 and 7 p.m. And that's when the sun's shining the highest. So that's when an individual consumer has the most control over their energy consumption.
Troy, you told me a little bit about your own opportunity with solar there. Could you tell everybody else about that?
I have a building with a flat roof, a new flat roof, and a house. I actually have several rental properties as well. But the thing is that I got a quote back in November of last year, and I'm looking at it right now, from a local solar provider. And I thought, at the time, wow, I'd been hearing about the prices of solar panels coming down dramatically. And so I got this quote. And for our building to pay 3/4 of the electric bill, to produce what was estimated to be 3/4 of our electric bill, in November, that price was $56,000 to put. I'm sorry, $56,000 to put on the panels to do that. I got an email about a week before last. Let's see, it's a week before last, and that same offering now is $36,000. And with after-tax credits, and Mr. Croft probably has some specific examples of that, but after-tax credits and depreciation, accelerated depreciation opportunities as a business owner, I've got $14,000 net invested in that. And from what I can tell, I'll recover my investment in 3 to 4 years, and with a 30-year life expectancy on those panels. Now, whenever you're a consumer, and I looked this up on Bankrate, you can get a 1% return on your CD, guaranteed 1% rate on your CD. The 30-year Treasury is paying less than 3% now. And I can invest my money and get it all back in 3 to 4 years. And after that, it's all money in the bank for me. That rocks. And that's under current pricing for fuel. If we have any kind of increases in fuel costs that my gosh, Chesapeake's own reports suggest they've got to have $6 gas just to break even.
Nah.
$6 natural gas, $6 an MCF to break even. So whether that's true or not, I don't know, but that's out of their stuff. So anyway, if we have any increase in cost on the underlying supply of fuel, we're going to have increase in energy costs going forward. That sounds like energy independence for the consumer is what I'm saying.
I think, Adam, if I could just follow up, I think Phil's right. And, when I stress the long-term nuclear aspects, I want to make it clear that I had earlier suggested we need to look at energy as a system. So he's right in that we need to look at energy in terms of oil, natural gas, nuclear, wind, solar, as he's mentioned. Those statistics he quoted on solar are very intriguing to me. I do think we need to look at every single type of energy resource we have available, and of course we need to look at efficiency. So when those prices in any area, and if we go toward nuclear and we have a shortage of plutonium or uranium, those prices are going to adjust. So we need to keep a balance of our energy systems going forward long term. That'll be the best thing for our total independence.
Can I just jump in and ask a quick question on just the world demand? A lot of we're talking obviously about the United States and North American independence, but a lot of the growth in the future is going to be coming from developing countries. They've got a thirst and a demand for power to increase their economies themselves. So our demands are going to be fairly flat in the future. How do we get that in a global scale and kind of figure out how to best go forward?
Well, it is a global economy, and especially with respect to oil. We look at natural gas as being more of a North American commodity, but oil is really a worldwide commodity. And so if we become more energy independent with respect to oil production in the United States, it means we may import less, say, from the Middle East. Now, to the extent we can reduce our reliance on hostile governments in the Middle East, I favor that. Now, if China displaces us as an importer from the Middle East for oil, the question becomes, well, does that mean their influence in the region increases relative to ours? Does that mean that they displace us? Well, that could be. So there are some policy issues, foreign policy issues that probably need to be addressed with respect to that. I think as we recover from this world contraction we're now coming out of, world demand for oil and for energy in total is going to increase. So naturally growing economies like China, India, some of the other third world countries are going to increase their demand for energy, and the world's going to have to keep up with that.
Mr. Crofts, I'm interested in, you said that, I think you mentioned this a little bit earlier, but you mentioned that you told me earlier that there are some truck manufacturers that are having new engines coming out. We talked about the effort to increase the number of stations out there. Just wondering your take on if you see this continuing to grow at a wider scale with you, particular with some of your competitors, with others in the industry.
Yes, I think it will continue to grow. Now, what's happening now is California really started the natural gas market with government subsidies, heavy government subsidies. Those guys got trucks out there almost for free between the state and the federal government because the ports of Long Beach and LA were so polluted that the air pollution was so bad that they had to do something. And then there were a few incentives out there. We were able to take advantage of a few $1,000s in Pennsylvania. But I think the incentives I'm sure the incentives in the natural gas industry, transportation fuel is not going to happen. I don't think our Congress has a appetite for subsidies anymore. I think that can hold true to our previous guys talking about ethanol. It's mandated now in some states, but if ethanol is not mandated and they get rid of the subsidy or they continue to reduce the subsidy, same with biodiesel. It was a great idea at the time. If they take that $1 a gallon out of there, and if it's not mandated, I don't think the public's going to go for it. But at any rate, the natural gas transportation fuel can't survive without any government subsidies for trucks or for stations. We're doing it now. The trucks we're buying in Florida have no subsidies, unlike, and I'm not sure what happens on the windmills and the solar. I understand there are solar subsidies, and I don't know about the windmill subsidies, but I think this business is sustainable without government help. The electric vehicles, they get, I guess it's about $7,500 or something, and then the Mr. Phil fuel tanks you put in your garage, there's a rebate on those. There's a rebate on, but I think the government's going to get rid of those subsidies, and energy is going to have to stand on its own. Natural gas industry and transportation fuels can't stand on its own, and it's proven to be profitable for the stations and for our customers and for ourselves.
I think that is about all the time that we have, but I very much appreciate all of you. To our guests, we appreciate you contributing to this discussion, helping us out here. To our viewers, we appreciate you for tuning in, for watching, and for reading. And remember that the second half of our series on energy independence will run in this Sunday's Oklahoman. And we appreciate you continuing to follow us. Thank you.